Hi everyone, I'm here in my office and we are going to try this screencasting thing, and we're going to start by talking about the first aspect I want us to think about during this very strange time, which is the vascular plant body. And today we're going to focus primarily on meristems, or the areas of the plant that actually allow the plants to produce new cells and grow. So meristems are responsible for plant growth. That's not the main definition, but that is true about them. Plants can't grow without meristems. So as you know, I think from reading the short article, The Essence of Plantness, most vascular plants grow indeterminately. What that means is that they continue to make new organs and new cells throughout their lives. And this is unusual if you think about mammals, for example, or other animals that you think about pretty often. We make two arms, two legs, one head, and that's about all we've got. Plants, on the other hand, can make new leaves and new roots, and they can grow, if they're trees, they can grow up to 1,000 years, like these redwoods pictured here are over 1,000 years old, and yet at the very tips of each of these branches, they have brand new cells. So meristems are what is allowing those plants to keep collecting and concentrating. And I'm going to show this video just to show you how plants grow. We're going to see if this works. Is it going to find this screen? Is it going to find the screen? It found it! Yay! Okay, so what is a meristem actually? A meristem is defined roughly as an area of embryonic cells in a plant, and in the meristematic area, those cells are able to reproduce and eventually develop into any kind of cell the plant is actually going to use. So meristems come in a variety of different flavors. We have apical meristems, axillary meristems, and lateral meristems, and those are all pictured in this diagram over here. So I'll briefly describe what each of those is. So apical meristems are probably the most important ones, and they're certainly the ones we're going to spend the most time on today. Apical meristems occur in the shoots, the above ground parts of the plant. They're at the terminal bud, and they also occur at the tips of each roots. Now, apical meristems are responsible for cell division and lengthening the plant. So they produce new tissue that allows the primary body of the plant, the newest tissues of the plant, to expand mainly in length. They're very important because without apical meristems, stems couldn't grow long and roots couldn't grow into the soil. Axillary meristems are kind of apical meristems in reserve. In the shoot, or the above ground part of the plant, axillary meristems are located between the leaf and the stem. They're always kind of in the crook of the leaf, and sometimes they're small buds, sometimes they're a little more expanded, and sometimes it's just an area of cells that might get activated if the apical meristem is removed or cut or grows far away. These axillary meristems may start acting like apical meristems. So they are also responsible for primary growth in length of the plant. Lateral meristems, finally, are meristems that are responsible for secondary growth, or growth in breadth or thickness of the plant. And we're going to talk more about those when we get to trees and secondary growth. So we're going to primarily talk today about apical meristems, but we'll mention axillary meristems later as we go forward. All right. So here's a complex diagram, which is pretty helpful in showing where the meristems are on a typical vascular plant. So here we have a typical vascular plant. It has a stem, it has leaves on the stem, it has roots, and I want you to see here that the terminal bud, when you blow it up here, has an area of cells right at the tip, which is the apical meristem, and then that, when you look at it under a microscope, actually looks more like this. So these are your leaf primordia, and the apical meristem is right here. These cells are very small, and they're the ones that are actively dividing and producing new plant tissues that are undifferentiated. The same is going on at the tips of each root. So here blown up is a root cap and a root tip. The apical meristem of the root is actually located right here. And in a micrograph, the apical meristem is located basically right here where all of the cells are very small. We'll talk about the root cap a little later. But the apical meristem is located right here. So now we're going to look at the shoot apical meristem and the root apical meristem separately. So starting with the shoot apical meristem, we have here again a micrograph, which is a longitudinal section through the leaf and the stem, and the very tip is where we're looking. The apical meristem is located right at the very tip of the plant, of the shoot as it's growing. It has very small cells, and it's protected only by the leaf primordia. The ground meristem, procambium, and protoderm, we will get to those later. Those are sort of submeristems, so the cells are still dividing here, but they're getting a little bit more specialized. These apical meristem cells are the ones that produce all of these other cells that came up before. So here again is a different picture of a different shoot apical meristem. The apical meristem cells are right at the rounded tip, and the leaf primordia are like little, I don't know, like a little helmet over the apical meristem, but it's not a very good protection. The only thing that's really protecting the shoot apical meristem are these immature, very, very small leaves, and other than that, they're pretty much exposed to the elements. So the protection of the shoot apical meristem is, I don't know, pretty low key, I guess. The other thing that I would like you to know about apical meristems is that there are some cells of the apical meristem, especially up here at the very, very tip, that very, very rarely divide. I think of them as sort of like the gene bank of the plant. The cells at the very tip of these apical meristem cells, or of these apical meristem areas, rarely divide, and the ones that are doing most of the heavy dividing are actually a few cell layers down. Down here, these ones are actively dividing. This area up here is called the quiescent center. The quiescent center is an area that is a genetic reserve for the plants, and they only divide quite rarely, maybe once every 100 divisions, and they sort of give the dividing cells sort of fresh material every once in a while so that the cells which are actively dividing and potentially accumulating mutations don't accumulate too many mutations. So the quiescent center is a really great place for the plant to sort of hold on to its genetic self even after thousands of years in some of these plants, like a bristlecone pine in the in the southwestern United States, the bristlecone pine tree, which might be 2,000 years old, maintains its genetic integrity because of the quiescent center where the cells divide very rarely. Those cells that divide very, very rarely are called initials, and the cells that they produce, they're sort of daughter cells that then divide rapidly and are responsible for the plant producing new tissues. Those are called derivatives. All right, one more thing about the shoot apical meristem I wanted to mention in grasses, which are some of the most common plants that you might find in your environment, in the lawn, but also in your food. So corn, rice, wheat are all grass plants, And of course, all of the lawns that you see all over DePauw, you can't see them anymore, but I can, are grasses, and they have very unusual apical meristems. Their apical meristems are actually located deep down inside what looks like a stem. And if you so look at a typical grass plant, it has these leaves that are coming off, these blades, and they have collars that are wrapped around each other in like a little tube. And if you look really closely and sort of down at the base here, and this is blown up over here on the right, you can see all of the little nodes with the axillary meristems and the leaves coming out. And the apical meristems tucked way down in the center here. So it's protected. And I'll let you answer this question. Why might this particular arrangement of apical meristems be advantageous for grasses? I'll give you a little hint. Many grasses are grazed by large herbivores, and the herbivores come and um, they chomp those meristems right off. So why, or they don't chop the meristems off, they chop off the leaf area. So why is it useful for grasses to have the meristems closer to the soil surface rather than up at the top where most typical plants have their meristems? Okay, just a little bit more. Here's a root apical meristem. And again, the root apical meristem is located a few cell layers back from the very, very tip of a root. So the apical meristem is located in the center, right around here. You can sort of see these cells extremely small. They lack very much cytoplasm. They have only proplastids. They do have active nuclei that are actively dividing and going through cytokinesis and mitosis. But the root apical meristem is located a little bit further back behind what we call the root cap. So the root cap is located here, and it has thick cells that produce a material that allows the roots to grow through the soil, and it also protects the root apical meristem very effectively from abrasion and damage. So root apical meristems have this protective tissue around them. The apical meristem actually gives rise to those cells as well. But mostly the new cells that apical meristems produce in roots are above the root apical meristem here. And again, you'll see these words protoderm, ground meristem, and procambium. These are the areas of rapid cell division and differentiation into the three kinds of tissues that a plant makes. And we're going to get to those soon. All right, one last thing about meristems that I want you to know, which is that meristem cells are totipotent. This means that they're totipotent. It's a hard word to say, actually. Totipotent. This means that apical meristem cells, when they are in meristematic phase, they are like the original stem cells. Wonder why they're called stem cells? Maybe this is why. Apical meristem cells can develop, given the right chemical and environmental cues. They can develop into any kind of cell. They are able to develop into epidermal tissue, ground tissues, which we'll talk a lot about in the next lecture, and or xylem and phloem vascular tissue. So apical meristem cells are totipotent. They have the genetic potential to become any kind of plant cell. That's a really important aspect of apical meristem cells. So apical meristems are totipotent. They are able to divide and produce new cells, which develop into new tissues. And the quiescent center of the meristem cells, or the meristem areas, excuse me, are able to maintain the genetic integrity of the plant. And so you can see that apical meristems are pretty awesome, and they're really fun to look for. And what I encourage you to do this week is actually go out and find some plants growing wherever you are. It might be your kitchen, it might be your yard, it might be the street or the sidewalk, wherever you happen to be. If you can go outside and look for a plant and find the apical meristem. So in this plant, this is a tulip tree. The apical meristem is way at the tip here. You'd have to like pull apart all these baby leaves to see it, but it's there. And then you can see the axillary meristems here and here. And you can't see the lateral meristems, but they're there. So I want you to go and look for meristems wherever you can find them, and imagine how they are producing the new tissues of the plants in the spring. All right, I hope you guys are all doing well. I miss you a lot, and I'll hopefully see you online soon. Thanks.